never believed in ghosts, or demons, or any of that supernatural nonsense. But after my experience during the graveyard shift at the warehouse, I can't look at the world the same way anymore. I work for a logistics company in the middle of nowhere. The place is surrounded by miles of empty fields, the kind of area where the nearest neighbor is a good 30-minute drive away. My shift starts at 11 p.m. and ends at 7 a.m. Most nights are uneventful. It's just me, the sound of forklifts, and the hum of the fluorescent lights. That night started like any other. I was going through my routine, inventory checks, logging shipments, and keeping myself awake with way too much coffee. Around 1 a.m., the power went out. It wasn't unusual. The area had frequent blackouts, and the generator usually kicked in within a few seconds. But this time, it didn't. I fumbled for my flashlight and headed toward the breaker room. The warehouse felt impossibly large in the dark, with towering shelves casting long, eerie shadows. The sound of my boots echoed unnaturally, as if the space were alive and listening. When I reached the breaker room, the door was ajar. That was odd. I always made sure it was locked. I pushed it open slowly and shined my flashlight inside. The air was icy cold, far colder than it should have been, even for a January night. I saw the breaker switches, but before I could step inside, I heard something behind me. Faint whisper. "Help me." I spun around, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. There was no one there, just rows of towering shelves filled with boxes. My heart pounded in my chest as I told myself it was just my imagination. I quickly flipped the breaker switches, and the power came back on. Relieved, I returned to my desk. The lights illuminated the warehouse again, but something felt off. The air seemed heavier, almost oppressive. As I sat down, I noticed something on the security monitors. One of the cameras, camera 7, was glitching. The screen flickered, but I could make out movement. Someone, or something, was standing in the far corner of the warehouse. It was tall and unnaturally thin, its limbs elongated in a way that didn't seem human. His head was cocked to the side, and it wasn't moving. It just stood there, staring directly at the camera. I grabbed the intercom mic and called out, "Whoever's in here, you need to leave. This is private property." No response. I decided to investigate. Armed with nothing but my flashlight and a crowbar I found near my desk, I made my way toward the area where I'd seen the figure. My footsteps felt deafening in the silence. When I reached the corner, it was empty, just a pile of old pallets and some stray boxes. And then I heard it again. The whisper, "Help me," came from above. I pointed my flashlight upward, and my breath caught in my throat. The figure was perched on top of one of the shelves, its body contorted in an unnatural way. Its eyes, if you could even call them that, were hollow, dark voids. It opened its mouth wide, wider than should have been physically possible, and let out a guttural scream that echoed through the warehouse. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back at my desk. My hands were shaking as I called my supervisor, begging him to come to the warehouse. He thought I was joking at first, but something in my voice must have convinced him. He said he'd be there in 30 minutes. The next half hour was the longest of my life. The warehouse was eerily silent, but I could feel it watching me. I didn't dare look at the security monitors again. Every second felt like an eternity until I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. I rushed to the front door to meet my supervisor, but when I opened it, the parking lot was empty. No car, no headlights, nothing. And then, the door slammed shut behind me. I turned around slowly, and there it was, standing just a few feet away, its hollow eyes locked onto mine. I don't remember much after that, just the sensation of falling, the sound of my own screams, and then nothing. I woke up in the hospital 2 days later. They told me I'd been found unconscious in the warehouse, but they couldn't explain the deep scratches on my arms and chest. My supervisor said he never received my call, and when the morning shift arrived, the power was on, and everything looked normal. I quit that job the next day. Some nights, I still hear the whispers, even though I'm miles away from that warehouse. "Help me." Working the night shift at a small, remote convenience store has its perks. It's usually quiet, and I can catch up on reading or watch movies on my laptop. But one particular night, things took a turn for the worst, and I experienced something that still haunts me to this day. It was a cold winter night, and the store was practically empty. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional beep of the security system. I was behind the counter, engrossed in a book, when the store door chimed. I looked up to see a man enter, his face obscured by a hood. He didn't say a word as he walked through the aisles, his footsteps eerily silent on the tiled floor. I watched him closely, feeling a sense of unease. Something about him was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. He picked up a few items and brought them to the counter. As I rang up his purchases, he finally spoke, his voice low and raspy. "You should be careful tonight," he said. "Things aren't always what they seem." I forced a smile and handed him his change, trying to ignore the chill that ran down my spine. He left without another word, and I watched him disappear into the darkness. The unease lingered, but I brushed it off as my imagination running wild. A few hours later, the store was empty again. I was restocking the shelves when the lights flickered and went out, plunging the store into darkness. The emergency lights kicked in, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I grabbed my flashlight from behind the counter and checked the breaker box, but everything seemed fine. As I returned to the front of the store, I heard a noise behind me, a soft, shuffling sound. I turned around, shining the flashlight down the aisles, but saw nothing. The store was silent, and the unease grew stronger. I decided to check the security cameras, hoping to find an explanation. The cameras showed the store from different angles, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I was about to turn off the monitor when I noticed something strange. In one of the aisles, a figure stood motionless, partially obscured by the shelves. My heart pounded as I realized it was the same man from earlier. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously approached the aisle, but when I got there, it was empty. The figure had vanished, leaving me alone in the dimly lit store. Panic set in, and I considered calling the police, but I didn't want to overreact. As the hours dragged on, the unease turned to fear. I kept hearing faint whispers and shuffling footsteps, but whenever I checked, there was no one there. The store felt oppressive, as if something was watching me from the shadows. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the lights flickered back on, and the oppressive feeling lifted. I let out a sigh of relief and tried to convince myself it had all been in my head. But as I reviewed the security footage one last time, my blood ran cold. In the last frame, the figure stood right behind me, its face twisted into a grotesque grin. I hadn't felt a presence, but it was there, watching me the whole time. I quit my job the next day, unable to shake the memory of that night. To this day, I can't explain what happened, but the feeling of being watched still haunts me. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I swear I can hear those faint whispers, reminding me that things aren't always what they seem.